All right, so let's take off then. Let me set my clocks. Hi, everyone. And today we are going to talk about Bicep. So, we're going to talk about if you are already considering, or if you're considering infrastructure as code, if you want to get started with it, or if you're not sure what technology to choose. We're going to talk about what Bicep can do specifically for your Azure environment. And this might also be interesting to people who are still using ARM templates at this point. If you are using ARM templates and you're thinking about Bicep, not sure if it's worth it, this is the session for you. So keep watching. First, let me introduce myself real quickly. My name is Barbara Forbes, and I am an Azure MVP as well as a GitHub star. I work as the Azure technical lead at OGD in the Netherlands. I write a blog on Azure and automation, which you can find at Forbes with a 4.nl. And my Twitter handle is BA4BES. That's also my GitHub handle. And I've learned that you're now supposed to have a Mastodon handle if you want to be one of the cool kids. I'm here still hoping that Twitter will survive because I really love Twitter. But if it doesn't, that is my Mastodon handle. So with that out of the way, what we're going to talk about today, because we don't have that much time, we're going to go into the concepts of Bicep. So how does Bicep work, and what are some things that Bicep can do that can really help you out if you are working with infrastructure as code. And then a little bit about infrastructure as code as a whole. So how do you structure your templates and how do you work with it? This is not just for Bicep. This can be for a lot of other technologies as well. So first things first, the concepts of Bicep. So what is Bicep and what does it do? Bicep is an Azure native language. So it's native to Microsoft, created by Microsoft. It's created by the people who also create ARM templates. And what it basically is a wrapper around those ARM templates. So in the background, ARM templates are still created and deployed. The point of Bicep is to make it a language that is more readable and usable for humans, which we'll see in a second when we look at some examples. Bicep is domain-specific language, which means that it's not according to any syntax of any other language. It has its own syntax. It's completely open source. You can find it on GitHub, and it's written in C#. Being open source, you can also add issues there and contribute to it if you want to. An important thing to mention at this point, it's still in public preview. It has been for a while. The thing is, it has full support. So if something goes wrong, you can get a support ticket at Microsoft and you get full support. And I will say that Bicep at this point is production ready. You can use this in production without issues. The thing why it's still a public preview is that they cannot promise at this point there will be no breaking changes. So that's something to keep in mind. There might be some point in the future where it does go to version 1.0 and it might have some breaking changes which you have to deal with then. Still, in my opinion, you can do this in production and use it over there. It's completely ready for that. So why do we have Bicep? Let's just look at the old situation if you were running ARM templates. So this is an ARM template for one of the most seen resources, a storage account. And this is pretty basic. This just has a storage account prefix and it uses that to create a storage account name, and then it creates the storage account. Now, as you can see, this is JSON. And while JSON has its perks being a very consistent language, it's always the same. The thing is, JSON was not made for humans. It was made for computers. And we have changed some things to help that. For example, in an ARM template, you are at this point allowed to use comments. I'm not a big fan. Always feels a bit iffy, but you technically can do it. But the thing what you see with JSON is there's a lot of brackets there and a lot of quotation marks. And just a lot of things in the syntax you need to keep track of. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, and for a lot of configuration, JSON is still the way to go. But with templates, they can become very long and become hard to read. Let's look at the exact same template, but then with Bicep. Now, this is a lot shorter. And I really like that I could blow this up a lot bigger because it's just a lot shorter in code. And if we look at them side by side, we see that all those brackets are pretty much gone. The brackets that you have are pretty useful. They make a point. A lot of lines are added together. So if we look at the first parameter, which is storage account prefix, takes about 4 or 5 lines. And in the Bicep template, it takes just 1 line to get actually 2 lines for the maximum length. So 2 lines for the same information. So it's a lot shorter, a lot cleaner, and the point of it is to make it more readable and easier to write. And maybe you are now thinking, like, okay, but this is a completely new language. I understand the syntax of JSON, and I don't know how this syntax works, and now I need to relearn everything. This is kind of true, but Visual Studio Code can help you out, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Here we go. There is the Bicep Visual Studio Code extension, which is pretty much incredible. If you work with ARM templates, you might have the ARM extension, which is also pretty good. But the one for Bicep is so impressive that I need to mention, I was skeptic when Bicep came out because I really like JSON and I loved working with ARM templates. I was really skeptic. But with the extension and everything that it added on, it made me so happy that I needed to start doing talks straight away. So let's see how that works. So we're going to create our trusty storage account again. The first thing you need to define is resource. And if you are not sure about that, even that will be tab completable for you. So it helps you with defining the resource. So I'll tab complete this. And the next thing I need to add is some sort of placeholder to be able to refer to this specific resource later. So I use STA for storage account. And then I need to add the resource type. And I press space and all the other information already came up in a giant drop-down menu because there's a lot of Azure resource types. So if we scroll all the way down, there are so many options here. So you might think, oh no, I have to find the storage account and what domain was that under? Which with storage accounts is not that difficult, but with other ones it can be. The good thing is you can just start typing. So I'll start typing storage. And I don't even have to go that far because right there I see storage accounts, which is what I needed. So I'll tab complete that. And the next thing it suggests is the API. So I can add the API version here, which API I want to use. APIs sometimes change. So you want to stick this to a specific version so that you know that it will always work, even if a new one is being released. Of course, you need to keep track of it. Sometimes check if new versions are available. So if you can, always pick the latest one. So I'll tab complete this. And there we go. All right. Let me remove this for a little bit more space. And if I press space now, it asks me if I want to create a new one or refer to an existing resource. So these are also options, but let's just stick with we're going to create a new resource, which needs the equal size. So tab complete again, press space, and here it asks me what I want to add. I can just make an object here. I can have loops here, conditions, or I can add the required properties. So let's tab complete that to see what it actually means. And these are the properties you need to add to be able to deploy this resource. So everything that is not here has a default value. So it shows you all the properties that don't have a default value. It's really handy if you want to do quick deployments. I will say this doesn't work for every resource. It works for the most used resource. A lot of the resources that are not used that often won't have all the information they need. So that's something to be careful with, but it's a really nice starting point. So we are now having to make a name for our storage account. So I'll just add example here. And I add the single quotation marks to make sure that they know it's a string. All right. Now I need to set the location. And we saw that beforehand, where you can use the location of the resource group. So let's do that. So I type res and get resource group. I type a dot and it says all the properties I can use from this resource group. Let's use location. And now I can choose the SKU right here. And oh, this is the point where I might think, okay, I have to come up with the names of the SKUs. No, I don't. I press space, everything is here. And this kind of stuff really, to me, is so impressive if you're starting out, that it will help you to know what options you have. And you don't have to type this, and that saves time. So I'll use standard LRS because that's the cheapest. And I can define the type. Let's pick this one. And I'm pretty much done. I can now deploy this. And I barely even typed the name. I typed the name of the resource group and all the other things were tabbed complete. But even if I want to add more properties, I can press space here and find properties. And it says properties as an object. You see it defaults to the right value. And if I press space here again, it gives me all the properties I can choose from. So access tier, stuff like that. A lot of information is added as well. Really nice. So if I use access tier, tap complete, space again, and it tells me all the options I have. Cool, hot, or premium. So this really helps with shaping your own resources and finding out about how those properties are named in a template. So if you think this is too much work, you can even use snippets. So let's say we want to create a virtual machine. I'll type VM, and here I get a bunch of options. So it started with res for resource, and I got a bunch of VMs I can deploy. So if I set Windows and tap complete again, it creates a Windows VM for me. This is not perfect, these snippets. Often you have to add some stuff here. It uses, for example, a parameter that does not exist. You don't want your VM to be called name. So you do have to check everything. And in the case of the VM, you really have to check. I really don't know why it uses a 2012 R2 server as the default, because I believe that was already pretty old when Bicep was first born. But okay, it at least gives us an overview of what properties you might add and how it can be structured. So this is something you can use to work with. Really nice, in my opinion, to be able to use stuff like that. And now from this place, if you are here, you can use PowerShell or Azure CLI to deploy it directly from your local computer. You can also do it in pipelines, of course. So with stuff like this, you would be able to deploy it. And if you use AZ Bicep build, then you would be able to generate the ARM template that would have been used. So it can generate the ARM templates for you so that you can see what the results are of your actions. Really nice. So let's move back. Let's look at a few things you can do with Bicep, which the loops one, to me, is the one where Bicep wins on so many levels from ARM templates. We'll get to that in a second. So here we actually have two loops in one resource. I have a loop for a bunch of virtual networks, which are defined in an array. And then for each virtual network, it will create a range of subnets. So you can define how many subnets you want, and it will create that range. So the array part is just this one. Just for VNet in VNets. So there's an array with VNet that's called VNets, and it will grab all the entries in that array. So that's all you need to do for that loop. And if we look for the range, here we see for each, or I as we are using it, I in range, you would go to range from 1 up until a parameter called subnet count, where you define how many subnets you need. So this is pretty basic looking. Let's just remind ourselves of what this looked like in ARM templates, where you would have a copy loop right at the top, where you would define the name of the copy loop and how many counts, and then you had to go to the copy index at all the different entries. And this was so prone to errors. It was so easy to make errors here because you had to know the syntax exactly, especially with a copy index. And I know that copy index could do a lot more things than people would realize. And that we know that because Bicep is not doing anything that ARM templates can't do. It's just making it easier to write for you. So it's taking care of all this of this. Now, if we look at conditions, so maybe we want a resource to be deployed conditionally if a certain parameter has a certain value, for example. Here we see the parameter deploy storage account, which is a Boolean set to true in this case. And here it says if the deploy storage account Boolean is set to true, then it will deploy. Really clean, really simple. And I'm gonna leave that one to make it not too difficult. Oh no, let's talk to this one real quickly. This is someone all the developers here will probably already know. And for the people who are from the IT Pro side, this can be a new one. It is pretty usable. You can use ternary operators or conditional expressions, as they call them. Which means you use the question mark, which you see in the variable for the SKU I created, where it will check if the environment is production. So if that value is true, in that case, it will use a premium LRS as the SKU. And if it's not, which you see by the colons, then it will use a standard LRS. This takes a bit of getting used to if you're not used to it, but once you get the hang of it, this can be very handy to limit those if-else loops you would otherwise have. So it makes the output a little bit more clean. All right, now let's talk about how you structure your infrastructure as code, because this is a dilemma I have seen in a lot of companies and in a lot of use cases. So let's start with the basic. We are going to create some resources in Azure. And here we have a resource group, and maybe someone asked us to make this resource group. So someone said, hey, we need a web app. And it needs to have an application gateway. It needs a function for the back end, and it needs a virtual network for a private link, maybe. So, okay, cool. You say, okay, we can create this, no problem. And you can click through this in the portal without issues. And if it's really a one-time thing, or if it's your first time, that's a good way to go. The portal is really nice at visualizing what you're actually doing and helping you with drop-down menus to understand what settings you're creating. But now we are using this in our team. And this team comes up and says, yes, this is really nice that you click together, but we need development and production. All right, so we actually need two environments because they need to have a development place where they can also try stuff out. So now we could create templates, and we could create two dedicated templates to these two use cases. But if we think about it, between development and production, there are not that many differences, or there shouldn't be. I mean, the names might be different, the IP addresses might be different, and probably the SKUs, because a development environment is often a bit cheaper. So we could use just one Bicep file and create a parameter file next to it. So I have the parameters separately. And now we have two deployments with one set of code. That was the goal we're trying to reach, right? To have as little code as we need to deploy as much stuff as we can. So, all right, this is a no-brainer. We do it like this. We have one template. And now the scenario comes up where another team comes to our attention and says, hey, we need the exact same environment as they have. So we need development and production, the web app, the function, private endpoint, and application gateway in a resource group. And we think, cool, we already have a template for that. So we can just tell this team, oh, sure, just give us these names and the IP addresses, and we'll run it off, and we'll drink some coffee, and it will be finished. I mean, that was the goal we're trying to reach. How cool is that? We have now deployed 4 environments with just one set of code. And then the next team comes up and tells us, we want the exact same thing, except that it's very different because we don't need that function. So we don't want you to deploy that function. And now we're getting a bit of a dilemma. Should we still be using the same template? We could, because we have conditions. So we could say, okay, the function is a conditional resource, and you can set in a parameter if you want that function to be deployed or not. So we could still have these 6 environments with just one template. But then the next use case comes up where they say, yeah, we do need that function, but we don't need the private endpoint. So can you remove that and add the function back? All right, so now we're adding conditions to the private endpoint, and maybe we need to add conditions to the parameters that are needed for the private endpoint. And what if someone comes up and said, we don't need that application gateway? Should that be a conditional then as well? And what about that web app? That's supposed to be there for sure, right? But then someone might come up and say, yeah, we need a function that has a private endpoint and leave out the web app and application gateway. Do we still use the same file? And here's where you see the dilemma. How do you handle these kind of situations? The good thing is, as always, there is no correct answer. It's always, it depends. But the thing you need to consider is this very important balance. Usability versus flexibility. Often when you get more usability, you lose flexibility, and the other way around. And this can be difficult in large environments and probably guaranteed to change it one time or another. I'm going to show you what I mean. I have a template here of an application gateway. I needed a bit of a challenge when I started out with Bicep, and I created an application gateway that is completely flexible. People who have worked with application gateways know that they are pretty difficult to work with because the configuration needs to be exactly correct. And to get them into infrastructure as code was an even bigger challenge. So yeah, some people do stuff like go out in the weekend. I spend the whole weekend creating this template, and it was awesome when it finally worked. So it's not that much about what code is in here. I just want to show you that there's all this code, all these parameters, and with that it sets everything is flexible. And there's a lot of settings in an application gateway. Everything is flexible. I think the only thing that's not flexible is that it can only use one certificate. Other than that, completely flexible. Now let's look at the parameter file. Parameter files in Bicep are at this point still in JSON. They are working on that, but at this point it's still JSON. And over here, this is pretty good, but this gets really complicated really soon. As you see, I needed to use objects as my parameters. I tried to make it easier to work with, but there was just a lot going on to make this work. And here I have front-end ports, back-end address pools, back-end settings. See how many properties are in there and how deep those objects go. This is 147 lines. And while this works, this is very hard to use. If you want to use this, you need to know what the objects look like. You need to know how an application gateway works exactly. And you need to find out what properties you need to change for a new use case. And this is a resource where if you don't have an example of this parameter file, it's pretty much impossible to create this. So it works, not that usable. And then I thought, what is the most sort of use case that we had at that company for an application gateway? And most of our application gateways were set up for 443, so port 443, HTTPS, and a redirect from port 80 to port 443. And I made another template just for that one. So I created that here. And as I said again, it's not that much about the template. It's just good to see that a lot of it is hard-coded in here. But look at the parameter file. So here is an app gateway and 2 entries for a certificate because they are in the key vault. So 2 entries for a certificate and a backend address. And I'll admit I forgot one because you also need to add the front end address. But that's all there is. So this is usable for someone who does not exactly know how an application gateway works. And that is something that you want. You want to make it easy to use these templates. So in this case, this worked very well. So what we did actually is gave people this gateway, this template, unless they needed something else than this specific use case. So this is pretty good to consider when you're creating your templates. How much flexibility do you want and how much usability do you want? And then again, Bicep comes along with one of the greatest features it has, which is modules. So I'm going to show that again real quickly. So here in this folder, I have a few Bicep files. So here is our trusty storage account again. This is pretty much the same we already saw. I have that virtual machine we talked about, including a network interface, because it's going to need that. I have a virtual network, stuff like that. I have this all set up. These are all independent files. I can deploy these all on their own. They're standalone. But I can also refer to them from a different file. So here I have main.bicep, and I call module instead of resource. And if I look at the VNet here, I call that other file that is in this folder. So I call to vnet.bicep, and here I can set the parameters for that specific file. And this means that in main.bicep, I can refer to all these other files that I can store somewhere. And I can make multiple references to the same file and get that flexibility. So if I look at my modules here, if I look at that old example that we had where we were like, okay, how many templates do we actually need here? I can do it like this. I could just say, okay, I create a separate Bicep file for all those resources, and I'll refer to them from all those Bicep files. I'm not saying this is the best way. It's actually not the best practice to have templates that are just for one resource. But you could just make templates for solutions that fit what you have. So the templates are always the best practice, and you have the least amount of copying code that you could get. So this is something that is really nice to work with. Gives a lot of that flexibility that ARM templates couldn't give. And you can even take this one level further and create a registry, which is one place in your Azure portal where in a container registry, you can store templates and have your company use them. So you can give your company access to that. Teams that need them can get access to that, and they can refer to them directly in VS Code. Also pretty cool, and it still has autocomplete here. Even if it's at another place, it still has autocomplete. So I had to go to that level real quickly. The registry is a really cool thing to watch out for if you work at a bigger company. So if you want to follow along with this stuff, there are some resources out there for you. The first, of course, is just the Bicep repository, which you can find on GitHub. You can ask questions here, join the discussions, see the documentation, and add issues, or add to the code if you want to. I've also added a link to my blog, Forbes with a 4.nl, and then category Bicep. In this category, I have written a lot about basics of Bicep, about registries, but also a lot about how you can use it with pipelines in Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions, and how you can test your templates. And two aka.ms links, which the second one being so long that I added a QR code. So this is the part where you can take a screenshot. These are Learn Live TV episodes where we use Microsoft Learn. There is a lot of Microsoft Learn content about Bicep. And what we did is make videos out of them. So Microsoft made videos where people are following along with the modules. So you can either follow the modules yourself or you can watch as they are being followed. And the first series went out somewhere in the spring this year. And the second series, so the second link is starting. It's either already started somewhere this week or it is starting very soon. So it's pretty cool, and I'm doing some episodes myself. The second one is completely about Bicep and GitHub Actions. So really cool. And that is pretty much it. That's pretty much all I have. Like I said, you can find me on Twitter and on GitHub. I have a lot of repositories as well about Bicep. So that's BA4BES. And that's pretty much all I have here. So thank you for joining this event.
Thank you, Barbara, for giving us really good presentation. I really enjoyed, as all other session today. I took some notes and made some questions for you, but it seems that I was super quick and you answered in a couple of minutes later. for all of my questions. So I wanted to mention that your models are super cool, and then you did it 5 minutes late. But do you have one real question? Do you have maybe idea or when Bicep will be released for the parameter files? Because you mentioned that they are working on that.
Yeah.
That's the thing that they're annoying me right now.
Yes, yes, I know. And it's one of the next priorities, I think. They have a team working on it. You can join the Bicep community calls, they are open for the public. And in the community calls, they already did a demo on stuff that they are building on it. So this should be coming very quickly. I'm really excited about this as well. Of course, I'm not on the team, so I can't say when it's gonna come up, but I'm also really excited about that part.
Yeah, that is definitely something that will be very helpful because right now, for people who are not familiar with ARM templates and how JSON works, it could be pretty problematic
Yeah,
for them. For us, we are experienced with ARM templates. We are not humans. That
yeah,
is
but
not
still, it's
super.
messy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and really liked approach usability versus flexibility. And if you work with multiple teams, multiple customers, big organization, yeah, that could
mm,
be a big headache for uh, you who need to prepare something for other teams to to reuse. And also really like that you mentioned that VS Code is super cool, but not for all resources. I
yeah,
played a lot for the non-standard issues the last couple of weeks and found, okay, I need to type a lot of things manually because they're or deployed through the portal and find out what's exactly there.
no, it's so impressive, the extension. Let's hope
Yeah,
they keep it up and keep supporting it, because it made such a difference for me when I first started working with Bicep. It was already very good. And I also really like the linter rules, where it shows you if you've done something completely wrong, and also shows you if you've done something that's not wrong, but is ugly. It's not according to best practices, it will show you as well.
yeah, and I understand there is no enough time, but bicep config is such an amazing thing because
Yeah,
that will
yeah,
check you while you're writing something, and
absolutely.
that I learned from you last time.
Yeah.
So again, thank you very much for your participation. I hope we will see you soon on some other conferences
Yeah,
or maybe some Azure Heroines in person. We will see.
absolutely. Thank you.